Well, hi everyone, and welcome to the first Bloody Scotland Book Club party. We've been going a year tonight, and we have cupcakes to prove it. Yeah, I think we should auction them off afterwards, or else we'll just eat them all. We've got 4 each, so maybe we should offer, get a good question and I'll send you a cupcake. Anyway. My name is Lin Anderson. It's my pleasure and my honour to be chairing our birthday celebrations tonight. As we at Bloody Scotland know very well, it's our audiences that make a great evening. So you may not be sitting in the Albert Hall in Stirling and we can't hand round the microphone to you, but we still want you to take part in our discussions. So please do send in your thoughts and your questions as we go along. And now I'd like to introduce our panelists for tonight. First up is Mary Picken. And Mary has been blogging at Live and Deadly Net for the past 8 years, majoring in crime fiction. And she derives great joy from knowing that one of her reviews has encouraged someone to buy that book or borrow it from the library. And so say all of us writers here as well. Next is Tommy Zyw. Tommy is a gallery director based in Edinburgh. He is an avid crime reader and has been an annual judge on the Bloody Scotland McIlvanney Prize since its inception. Due to a work engagement, Tommy has kindly pre-recorded his thoughts for us tonight, and you'll hear that later. Our final panelist is Louise Fairbairn. Louise is a freelance journalist and a former crime fiction reviewer for the Scotsman newspaper. She has chaired events at several festivals and is part of the judging team for this year's New Zealand. Oh, I always get this name. I've forgotten it again.
Niall.
Thank you, Niall. I was going to put that G in Marsh Crime Fiction Awards. And she blogs at crimebookgirl.com. Right. Thank you very much, panelists, for coming up with great books, and I'm really looking forward to discussing them with you tonight. I thought the theme for tonight's book club is undoubtedly a birthday celebration. It's also a great celebration, we believe, of the breadth and the depth of crime writing, which is illustrated by 3 great books set in different times and different places. From an imaginary West Coast Scottish island in the present day in Thunder Bay, to the industrial north of England of the 70s with a classic novel, Get Carter, and finally to London in 1782 with Daughters of Night. We'll begin with a reading from Thunder Bay by the writer Douglas Skelton, which is the first in his series featuring journalist Rebecca Connolly. And here we have Doug reading a piece from the book.
Hi there, my name's Douglas Skelton and I'm going to read a short extract from Thunder Bay, the first in my Rebecca Connolly series. She felt sand beneath her feet and a warm breeze on her face, yet around her she could hear the shriek of a much fiercer wind. She opened her eyes and saw the water, so blue, calmer than she'd ever seen it before. Where it met the rocks, it was more a kiss than a slap. Even the seabirds seemed less predatory. They did not dive for prey, but hung against the clear sky like a child's mobile, as if to pierce the smooth surface of the water would be nothing short of a sin. She closed her eyes again, breathed in the air. It was sweet with no salty snap, no sense of the damp stench of rotting seaweed that could be all-pervading. She was happy here. She was always happy here. They used to come to the bay when they were children, the 5 of them, leaving their homes early in the morning to walk across the island. The journey took them hours, but they always made it. And no matter how tired they were, they raced down the trail from the cliff top, eager to be the first to hit the soft sand, the wind catching their hair and carrying their laughter to join the echo from the rock face. More often than not, she won the race because she was always the fastest runner, the boys too busy trying to best each other to notice she was way ahead of them. Then they would wolf down the lunches their parents had packed, or in Henry's case some housekeeper or other, and they would splash at the water's edge and play on the rocks that fringed the bay, seeking out sea creatures and discarded shells, daring each other to see how close they could swim to the caves, but no one actually attempting it. They were young, but they knew it was too dangerous, even for immortals like them. But they weren't immortal. She knew that now. They all knew that now. Voices. She heard voices, distant, incoherent, swirling around her within the fierce wind she couldn't feel. They said there were beings that lived in the winds, elemental creatures that breathed and sighed around the land and the beaches and the bays. But she didn't believe that. It was a tale of the old island, along with the witches in the mountain and the creatures in the water and petrified sisters standing watch on the shore. And yet, voices on the wind, surrounding her, calling to her.
I feel like clapping, actually, as if we were on the stage and somebody did a reading. It's such a powerful opening. We're going to move, firstly, to discuss this to Tommy, who has recorded a piece about the book for us.
Very good evening to everyone. Tommy Zyw here, and my sincere apologies not to be able to join you live tonight. Unfortunately for me, a work engagement came up which I just couldn't get out of. So thank you to Lin and Bob for allowing me to join in some format nonetheless. It was decided that I would comment on two of the books that we've read for this month's book club, and those were Thunder Bay and Get Carter. Two very, very different books, two books which I both really enjoyed. Thunder Bay follows the journey of Rebecca Connolly, who is a young, enthusiastic journalist based in Inverness, who, against her editor's orders, travels to the fictional Hebridean island of Storm, or Storm. I'm sure we'll all might have different pronunciations for that. But she travels there to uncover or to cover this this breaking news story, and in doing so, in her pursuit of the truth, she uncovers many of the sort of sinister undercurrents which are sort of bubbling underneath the surface of island life, and as well as discovering or confronting her own family's historic connections and historic shame linked to the island. And as the storm rages, as the weather pounds the beaches and the town on the island, so too must Rebecca deal with her own internal turmoil as she confronts her father's legacy and the emotional fallout from a recent miscarriage. So it's really, there's some really big themes in this book, which I think Skelton really deals with very, very well. What I didn't realise when I started reading the book was that this is the first of the Rebecca Connolly series, and I'd be really interested to read more to see how her character develops. I thought she was a really strong character. I'm always slightly wary of fictional Hebridean islands, but I did find that the picture the author painted of Storm was very convincing and atmospheric, and his characters were rich, they were diverse, and occasionally they're absolutely hilarious actually as well, which was a great light relief. There's some really interesting themes running through the plot, and what I felt was particularly interesting was the concept of what it is to be local. As people tuning in will know, if you travel to the Highlands and the islands, often the sense of local is difficult, because obviously people have travelled there. There's obviously the history of generations of people who live in there, and there obviously there is that conflict. And I felt that this book dealt with that question very, very well. There was also quite a thought-provoking conflict between the ingrained traditions of a place and the modern outlook or modernization, but also how a new generation or a new society deals with the history of a collective secret or collective guilt as well. So I thought that was very well done. But I'd be really interested to know what everyone else thought about the book, because there's lots more to discuss. There's some really, really current themes which run through the whole plot.
Oh, very good. Right, Mary, we'll come to you now, because you actively chose this book for us.
Yes,
right?
I did, and I chose it because it's incredibly atmospheric. It's very gripping. The characters, as Tommy says, are brilliant. And the minute I read the prologue, I knew I wasn't going to be able to stop until I'd found out what on earth was going on. What I love about it is that Storm, or Stirrum, as I believe the locals call it, is really an incredibly class character in this book. And alongside the weather, the whole thing is so vividly and visually described that you can feel that atmosphere. And you have no difficulty envisaging that this is a place where the past and the present sit together, maybe uneasily, but in a way that's going to be very difficult to prise apart. And I've never really read anything quite where that sense of place and that sense of climate goes hand in hand. The story is incredibly well layered, but what I think lifts the thriller from the norm is that it is beautifully, beautifully written. The prose is incredibly strong, and the setting's pitch perfect, the plotting's beautifully structured. But there's a moment in the book where the rhythms and the cadences just all flow. And when Rebecca is sitting waiting to hear what her father's secret is, what it is that's been hidden from her all these years, and the clock is ticking, you can just, all your senses tingle. And I just think that's brilliant. And as Tommy said again, there are also some sort of moments of brilliant imagery, like when he talks about the young lads whose testosterone serves as an umbrella in the rain. So for me, it's an evocative, beautiful, and tense piece of work which deals with everything from secrets to the death of the newspaper industry to who owns the land in Scotland and the influence of Russian money in a way that was certainly we were aware of at the time when Douglas wrote it, but has risen to somewhat more prominence since. So there's an awful lot in it, but mostly it's that atmospheric sense that it gives you that just sends tingles up and down your spine.
Yeah. Louise.
Yeah, I completely agree. I reviewed this for the Scotsman when it first came out, and it's one of the rare occasions when I thought, I really wish you gave star ratings. 5-star book from page one. I mean, it really is. And amazing. They're just getting better as the series goes on, which is amazing. And congratulations to Douglas for doing that. I think it is so much... Douglas Skelton he's written something like a dozen true crime books, and then he's written, I want to say 7 other novels previously. There's 4 books in the Davy McCalls. There's a couple of Dominic Quests, which are all film references and pop culture and snappy. And then there's the Janice Run, which is just this slick New York mafia thriller. They're all so very different.
Yeah.
And yet everything he's done, he's then poured it all into the Rebecca Connellys and just pushed it even further. I mean, it was a really, really quite a bold step to have a young woman as your protagonist in a new series when you are not a young woman. No offense to Douglas. But she's brilliant. You know, the idea that men cannot write women does linger terribly, but you know, here's another great one, because it just treats her like a person.
I know,
treats her like a
sane and
journalist.
sensible, and makes good choices.
Yeah. Apart from the ex-boyfriend, but you know, everybody's got one of those. I love as a journalist, I love how it's not exactly editorializing, but you get a sense of what Douglas wants to push. Is everybody has their criticisms of the press, but sometimes I think people forget what the good bits are and the good bits of local reporting, and I think he presents that very well. Rebecca is a very skilled interviewer, but that's because she has empathy. And she knows how to ask questions sensitively. This is what good journalists do. And the fact that she's then not allowed to technically go off to the island and write the story because budget cuts. It's like, oh my God, yeah, that's so real as well. I also love the little details like the testosterone umbrellas. I like the fact that Rebecca can't pack to save her life and her suitcase is about to fall apart. But it's a more
the wheel. No. It's lovely.
Yeah, they're just little details, and they're more subtle. Sometimes the Dominic crests are a good case in point. They are really supposed to be snappy and funny and all the rest of it. But he's taken just enough of that and dropped them in here, and so you've got light relief, but it doesn't distract from the atmosphere and the seriousness of what Rebecca's looking at and what some of the islanders are going through.
No, it's very well dialed back, isn't it? It's quite restrained, and I think all the better for that.
Yeah, it's beautifully controlled all the way through, and the little how the information is dosed out to you, and then you get a little, you know, Rebecca meets Chaz the photographer in a bar, and they have a little conversation, and you're just quietly reminded of, this is where we're at, and this is where we're going next, and it's such a piece of class. It really is, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I would add in that, well, for me, I've read some, but not all of the previous books and enjoyed them. But I remember, I think it was a PDF I got sent. I can't remember. I went searching for the book. So, but I think I got an advanced PDF. And I can remember sitting by the fire reading it and thinking, this is it. Yeah. This is the big one. Yeah.
This is the game changer.
This is the game changer. Yeah. And you're right. A lot of these, the other books had wonderful bits about them, about their worlds. It's just, and I felt funny about the fact it was an island that didn't exist until I started to read about it. And then I felt it did exist. And I felt the place existed. I felt I'd been dropped into this world.
I remember seeing Douglas talk about it at some point, and some of it's made out of bits that do exist. I think some of the mountains exist, and so he's kind of made a fake place out of real things.
Real things, yes. I thought one or two names I thought maybe recognised from some other mountain range. Yeah,
I think he didn't want to put a name on it because of the really terrible things that had happened there.
Yeah, for sure.
Who would want to stay in a real place with that kind of memory?
Yeah. The one other thing I would say before we say how much we liked it and move on is something that Tommy said. I mean, I'm home. I'm in my home village at the moment now. Our family came to Carbridge when I was 17, which I can tell you was a very, very, very long time ago. And there is still you sort of, once you cross a certain threshold, you become a local. You know, there are people now think I'm a local and they say, oh, you're home, or I'm in Edinburgh, they think I'm home. But that wonderful weaving of the people from the different parts of life and time, I thought he did really, really well in it.
I like the little, there's a conversation between Rebecca and Chaz. Now, Chaz lived I think he was brought up in London, and they moved to the island for his father to become the doctor there. Rebecca, her father was born and bred on the island, but he left at 18 and never went back, and she's never been there. And she feels like she should be the insider. She should be the local, but she's not. She doesn't know anything about the place. Whereas Chaz, who should be an outsider, has kind of been adopted to a degree. And it's really interesting. And you don't have to have spent time on a Scottish island to have that sensation. I grew up in a little village in Northumberland, and it's the same. It's a small place. Everybody knows exactly who you are and exactly who your parents were for 5 generations, your family were. And it's that same, the insular feeling that sometimes is a little suffocating, but sometimes it's lovely. I really, really like that.
Absolutely lovely. Well, I think that was all a bit of a success. So if Doug's sitting there listening, we love the book, and
we're fans.
Yeah, we
are so pleased that you wrote it and the ones that followed. So thank you very much, Doug, and for giving us Thunder Bay to talk about. Right, next up is something completely different. It's Get Carter by Ted Lewis. And we have a reading from the book by his biographer, Nick Triplow.
It's good to see bloody Scotland Book Club taking a look at Get Carter, which for a novel that's over 50 years old, still takes some beating. So this is from the opening, Thursday. The rain rained. It hadn't stopped since Euston. Inside the train, it was close, the kind of closeness that makes your fingernails dirty, even when all you're doing is sitting there, looking out the blurring windows, watching the dirty backs of houses scudding along under the half-light clouds, just sitting and looking, not even fidgeting. I was the only one in the compartment. My slip-ons were off. My feet were up. Penthouse was dead. I'd killed the Standard twice. I had 3 nails left. Doncaster was 40 minutes off. I looked along the black mohair to my socks. I flexed the toe. The toenail made a sharp ridge in the wool. I'd have to cut when I got in. I might be doing a lot of footwork over the weekend. I wondered if I'd have time to get some fags from the buffet at Doncaster before my connection left. If it was open at 5 to 5 on a Thursday afternoon in mid-October, I lit up anyway. It was funny that Frank never smoked. Most barmen do, in between doing things, even one drag to make it seem as if they're having a break, but Frank never touched them, not even a woody to see what it was like when we were kids down Jackson Street. He'd never wanted to know. He didn't drink scotch either. I picked up the flask from off the Standard and unscrewed the cap and took a pull. The train rocked and a bit of scotch went onto my shirt, a biggish spot just below the collar, but not as much as a bit down the front of the shirt Frank had been wearing when they found him, not nearly so much. They hadn't even bothered to be careful. They hadn't even bothered to be clever. I screwed the cap on and put the flask back on the seat. Beyond fast rain and dark, low clouds, thin light appeared for a second as the hurrying sun skirted the rim of a hill. The erratic beam caught the silver flask and illuminated the engraved inscription. It said, "From Gerald and Les to Jack, with much affection on his 38th birthday." Gerald and Les were the blokes I worked for. They looked after me very well because that's what I did for them. They were in the property business, investment, speculation, that kind of thing, Pity I had to finish. But sooner or later, Gerald would find out about me and Audrey, and when that happened, I'd rather be out of the way, working for Stein in the sun, with Audrey getting brown all over and no rain. I'm going to read a little section now, just as Jack on the train enters. Well, it's unnamed, but the town is Scunthorpe. At first, there's just the blackness, the rocking of the train, the reflections against the raindrops, and the blackness. But if you keep looking beyond the reflections, you eventually notice the glow creeping into the sky. At first it's slight, and you think maybe a haystack or a petrol tanker or something is on fire somewhere over a hill and out of sight. But then you notice that the clouds themselves are reflecting the glow, and you know it must be something bigger. And a little later, the train passes through a cutting and curves away towards the town, a small, bright, concentrated area of light. And beyond and around the town, you see the causes of the glow, the half-dozen steelworks stretching to the rim of the semicircular bowl of hills, flames shooting upwards, soft reds pulsing on the insides of melting shops, white heat sparking in blast furnaces, the structures of the works black against the collective glow, all of it looking like a Disney version of the dawn of creation. Even when the train entered the short sprawl of backyards and behinds of petrol stations and rows of too bright streetlights, the reflected ribbon of flame still draws your attention up into the sky.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, completely different, but quite remarkable. Louise, we're going to start with you.
Yeah, that reading from Nick Triplow is kind of, yeah, I've got shivers, and I read that in the book and just went, how has nobody told me that this amazing film was based on a book? I had seen the film 3 or 4 times without realizing there was a book, because obviously I wasn't paying enough attention. And it's actually kind of Nick's fault that I'm so obsessed with this novel now, because he did an event at I Write a few years ago, a live showing of Get Carter on a big screen, and he would talk about Ted Lewis and his biography, which is highly recommended, very interesting. And I saw it on the big screen and went, hang on a minute, this is bloody brilliant. I'd forgotten how good this was. Went away and read the book and went, hang on a minute, how, so good. It's so different. And that's kind of why I thought we should have it, basically. It's so different to pretty much anything I think we've had in the whole year of the book club. It's dark, it's gritty, it's very, very northern. And I'm sorry, I'm a northern girl at heart. It wasn't really like anything else around at the time either. There were some, what Nick Triplow calls Brit Noir novels coming out, but there wasn't a huge amount. There was an awful lot of police procedurals and English country house mysteries and quite nice, tidy books. There wasn't anything that's quite as horrible and sleazy and violent as this. I read that he struggled to get it published. So many publishers just looked at the violence and went, we don't want to publish this, it's terrible. And yet, it was, when it eventually got published, it was optioned to be a film almost at the same time. And the film has made it so much more famous than perhaps it would have been, but not changing a huge amount. But it's much more bleak. I think I said this to Mary when we discussed choosing it. It's bleak. It's hard going. It's not a nice, cozy read. You're going to get to the end of it. You might feel relieved rather than satisfied. But to me, it's utterly compelling. And it's utterly compelling despite the fact that it's violent, sleazy, misogynistic, and randomly racist in a couple of places, homophobic, and all of these things. There isn't a redeeming character in it. They're all pretty much awful, with possibly the exception of Doreen, but then she only has like 2 lines in the whole book. All of these things, you look at it and think, well, why is it attractive? And it's compelling. You get that fantastic crunchy language of Jack coming up on the train, coming north from his, I always think of him as being a sort of gangland enforcer in London. He uses violence like other people use, I don't know, words and gestures. That's his first port of call whenever there's a problem. He is in no way, well, you might call him an anti-hero if you're being generous, but there's nothing nice about him. There's nothing sympathetic even after about the first 2 pages, where you go, oh, well, his brother's died, this is terrible. And then you get into all this, how they fell out and why they fell out, and you're going, God's sake. It's an entire book of awful, violent, avenging angel, all the rest of it, but it's just so compelling. I can't, this is the 3rd time I've read it. I can't not. I know, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. But there's, I can bang on about this all night, basically. But yeah, it's horrible, but it's compelling, I think is the bottom line for me.
Yeah, I think that kind of sums it up, really. It's interesting because it's incredibly single-minded. There is just one thing that happens, and it is him making sure that he does what he has to do for reasons that I'm not even clear he knows. And it's just short, sharp prose. I mean, you got it spot on when you said crunchy language. It is absolutely crunchy language, where he just demolishes everything in his path in the quest for revenge without any kind of moral empathy there at all.
Not at all. It's just he's manipulative. He has no empathy. He just wants what he wants, and he doesn't really care how he gets it. There's no thought to anybody that he comes across. He's like this, oh God, like some kind of avenging angel, or, well, not an angel, avenging devil, perhaps. There was kind of something reminded me of it being like a Western almost. There's this frontier. Your guy comes in, an outsider comes into this frontier town for one specific purpose. All hell breaks loose. There is much use of guns, other kinds of violence, and then there's an ending which, and it's interesting that they changed it slightly it's more ambiguous in the book, and it's very much not ambiguous in the film. But it's right, because he started out as this god-awful person doing these god-awful things. There has to be consequences. And it's very kind of that kind of American hard-boiled noir, unempathetic guy, bad things, but there are consequences at the end. And I think that's very important.
One thing I would just pop in to say, well, 2 things actually. Nick Chiplow has come on and said that Get Carter was optioned before Luce's novel actually hit the shelves, which is interesting. But one of the things we haven't actually said was this: he actually solves the murder of his brother.
Oh yeah.
As he rampages through, you and all these other characters are all trying to get away with things. There's a real puzzle in there. You do, and you can see the way the thing gets fitted together. He's sharp and clever, as well as being pretty well horrible. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Right. We'll see what the only man on our panel, what Tommy has to say about this book.
Get Carter is a title which I'm sure everyone knows, even though they haven't read the book, and because of the film. And I must say, I have never seen the film somehow, even though I know how famous it is. But when I was sent the book with the front cover of Michael Caine with a shotgun, I think that image is just ingrained into the British consciousness. It's such a famous image. But even though I hadn't actually hadn't seen the film, so I was coming at it afresh, as it were. And I really, really enjoyed it. I thought it was a really terrific book, and to sum it up, sort of atmospherically, I would say it was Kes meets Guy Ritchie, and which I know sounds slightly odd, but I think I think that that's what I would say anyway. And I'm sure there will be some interesting comparisons made between Laidlaw, which I think were written probably a little bit later than Get Carter, but obviously in a similar time frame, in an industrial place, and particularly looking at working class living. But what I found most interesting, well, one of the things I found most interesting about this book was the perspective. And Jack Carter, the protagonist, is a bad guy. He's just a bad guy. There's no pretense that he isn't, and he doesn't care what any of the other characters think about him, and he certainly doesn't care what us, the reader, thinks about him. He is a whirlwind of violence and self-servingness, and he's a force of nature who just plows through the book. And even he travels to a northern town. I don't think it's actually specified which town it is, but he travels up from London to a town that he was born in the northern England industrial town, and to revenge his brother's death. His revenge, there's nothing compassionate or honourable about the revenge. It's for him. It's a box ticking exercise. He lives the life of a gangster, and this is what gangsters do. I'd be really interested to hear what everyone else thought about this book, because and about Jack Carter himself. But for me, it really reminded me of Denise Mana's The Long Drop in many ways, because it's such a contained plot. It's probably only lasts, timeline 48 hours or so. It's a whirlwind of violence, of whiskey, of drink, of cigarette smoke, and no one is likable in this book. There's not one character. Everyone is flawed. Everyone is self-serving, and it's but it's still absolutely gripping.
Well said. Yeah, and the other thing probably we should say in this, that the women in it don't come off any better than the men. They're all horrible. Some full of character, let's put it that way. But and misogyny is Tommy had said a wee bit earlier on, but he didn't hear it. There was, he was really shocked by the misogyny. But it felt real. It felt correct. I would just say I watched the film after I read the book, because I had never seen the film, and I was quite interested at how closely it really did play out the book. The ending was slightly different. What did you think about his attitude towards his niece? I've forgotten her name now.
Doreen.
Because what was her name?
Doreen,
that's right. Because I thought for a bit, I thought, oh, well, there's a redeeming feature, and then I wasn't so sure as time went on.
I think he categorizes women like this.
Oh, he does, yeah.
Very much so. And most of them fall into, well, yeah. But I think with Doreen, he doesn't know where she fits, and he doesn't quite know how to react to her.
Yeah.
And he's also got this thing at the back of his mind going, is everything as clear cut as it looks like in terms of his relationship to Doreen, shall we say, for anybody who's not read it. I'm trying not to spoil a 50-year-old novel. But I think that's it. And I think there's a hint when she gets really upset and yells at him after the funeral.
Mm-hmm.
But there's bark that he understands that, because that's a reaction he might have, or he might well have had at 15. But I think he's just not sure what to make of her at all. He's not in a world that includes teenage girls normally.
No. And the only other woman really he's supposed to have a relationship is the woman down in London, who's the sort of wife of his boss, as it were. And at parts in the film, I thought, well, the way he spoke about her, I thought, oh, has he actually found a woman that he actually does like? But we won't say any more about that.
The way that's done in the film versus in the book is interesting.
Yeah, I thought if anybody is interested, if they've read the book or they've seen the film, and then I think it's quite interesting to do both, because when I was thinking about the book after I watched the film, because I read the book first, I could see that the book is almost like scenes that you can just pick and put on screen. They were it was the way that it was written. It gave you the dialogue. You dropped into the scene. You could see why somebody would say this would make a good film. And there's one or two classic, wonderful scenes in the book reflected in the film. Probably my favorite one is of the woman singing in the pub. I thought that was an incredible scene.
Yeah, it's just completely insane, isn't it?
It's totally amazing. And just as amazing in the book, obviously that's where it began. That's where it began. Somebody realized it on screen, and I had my own picture of it in my head from the book. But okay, I think that was great, and thank you for suggesting it. I think the first two books are so different. It's just wonderful. And we're going to move on to our next one now. Our final book for tonight is Daughters of Night by Laura Shepherd Robinson. And we are delighted to have Laura read a piece for us.
Outside, the music had picked up tempo as night had fallen. Before Caro stretched a fantasy land, 10,000 lights adorning the trees and the supper boxes and the Chinese pavilion. The Vauxhall pleasure gardens were busy, even for a warm August night, ladies and gentlemen perambulating the lime walks under the stars. Drawing the hood of her sable cloak up over her piled hair, Caro headed for one of the garden's perimeter paths, where her peacock blue satin and lack of servant would attract less attention. The air was rich with the smells of Vauxhall, heady perfumes of flowers, hot pies, gunpowder. The fireworks startled like pistol shots, the revellers' faces flashing green and red and gold. A party of young bucks in carnival masks were swaggering around by a statue of Venus. They tried to waylay her with wine, but she hurried on. The path grew darker as she progressed deeper into the gardens. Couples giggled in the shadows, young gentlemen sweet-talking shopgirls and departing with their dubious virtue, clerks and apprentices fallen prey to Vauxhall's whores. Caro herself was not unfamiliar with this part of the garden. God might see everything, but husbands didn't, especially when they were sojourned in France, neglecting their wife and child. Nevertheless, her pulse was erratic. Every danger was heightened now, and anyone who saw her down here would presume she was meeting a lover. Curls of river fog drifted towards her. The fireworks boomed like a salvo of cannon. On either side, the trees pressed in, the path deserted. Caro turned into the dark walk that ran alongside the eastern wall of the gardens, nearly colliding with a man coming the other way. She cried out in horror, drawing back. Two bulging eyes loomed at her over a long, grotesque beak, a broad-brimmed hat casting the rest of the face into shadow. Caro backed up against the trees, half paralysed with terror, but the man in the mask brushed past her without a word. Collecting herself, a little shaken by the incident, she pressed on. Abutting the garden's wall were the bowers, a dozen or more little chambers carved into the greenery, invisible from the path. Soft laughter drifted on the breeze, and a voice murmured faint endearments. People hung hats or tied handkerchiefs to the lamps outside each bower, and Caro looked for their agreed signal, an ostrich feather. Spotting it tied to a lamp up ahead, she glanced around herself. Danger upon danger, but she'd come too far to turn back now. Hurrying into the bower, she stopped, drawing up short. A lantern, a stone bench, willows stirring in the breeze. These were the things she expected to see. Not a woman lying on the ground, her body curled like a question mark, the stomacher of her pink gown stained a shocking dark red. One of her gloved hands clawed at a wound in her throat, the other lay limp next to a blood-stained document on the grass. Caro stared, confused, half expecting the woman to rise and laugh at the joke. It was as if she'd stepped into one of Jacopo Sagnetti's paintings. The woman groaned, a raw, inhuman sound, and more details lodged in Caro's mind. Blood in the woman's chestnut hair, one slipper on, one slipper off, her bone-white face at once alien and familiar. Oh Lord! Oh no! Oh Lucia! Still she stared, at Lucia's contorted mouth, at the blood, so much blood. Don't just stand there, you have to help her. Move! Dropping to her knees, the soil wet with blood beneath them, she pulled off her cloak. More blood pumped from several deep, dark wounds in Lucia's stomach. Caro tried to staunch the flow, but her cloak was soon heavy and sodden in her hands. Who did this to you? She cried helplessly. Who did this? Lucia's fingers found her own. She gazed at Caro as if from a distance. Her lips parted, her words a whisper. He knows.
Well, okay, Mary, off you go.
Yeah, another one with a great prologue. I love Daughters of Night because it is a beautifully, beautifully rich tale of two very divided societies, and an absolutely fascinating exposition of how women were viewed at the time. But Laura's descriptive writing is it takes you there, and you can smell the deeply pungent smells of the streets, and the language is rich and bawdy, and the whole thing is vibrant, I think. It's a murder mystery with echoes of Georgette Hare on steroids, I'd say. In her first book, Blood and Sugar, the central protagonist was a man called Captain Harry Corsham. And although Daughters of Night is a standalone, the central protagonist is in fact his wife, Caroline Corsham. And while her husband is away on business abroad, she takes centre stage, and she hasn't been twiddling her thumbs. So she now has a bit of a problem, and she's on her way to meet a new friend, Lucia, an Italian countess, and it is Lucia who is found murdered, who she finds murdered in Vauxhall Gardens. And when she learns that Lucia is not in fact an Italian countess, but is in fact a prostitute called Lucy Lovelace, and that because she's a prostitute, nobody cares who killed her, she sets out to find out who did it and to get justice for Lucia at great personal cost. And that takes her on a journey to a London where the sex trade is part of a booming economy. And the way that women are treated is just extraordinary. And all the seediness and the filth and the brothels and the selling of women and girls is part and parcel of what Caroline Corsham, the nice, well-to-do woman who lives in the beau monde of society, discovers, working with a chap called Peregrine, who she takes on to help her. And it's populated with great characters like Kitty Carefree and other members of the exclusive Whores Club, who all seem to know quite a lot about Caro's friends and relatives.
You mean the male members of her?
Yes, sorry. Yes. So quite a lot of what Caro learns is eye-opening, but the research is impeccable. It's historically accurate. It's a beautifully explored expose of the treatment of women and especially of the sex trade. It absolutely looks at the double standards employed by men and how they subjugate women at every turn, and of the yawning gulf between the classes. But some things never change. And she does it all with robust language and great authenticity. And I just think it's a cracking book.
Louise?
Yeah, I have to agree. I did look at it when Mary recommended it and thought, well, I've been vaguely interested in reading it for a while because, should be reading everything. And then I picked it up when it was a bit of a tome. But in 550-ish pages in the paperback, it doesn't sag once. And I mean, that's a hell of an achievement before you start with everything else. Mary's right, the language is beautiful. It's perfect. Two of my problems with a lot of historical fiction is, one, most of the research ends up on the page, which it doesn't here. You can look at it and go, there is a lot of research has been done.
Yeah.
But it's so carefully woven in, it becomes, this is just how the characters live, and this is where they live, and this is the world they live in, as if it was a contemporary novel, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And my other problem with a lot of historical novels is the dialogue. It's either far too modern and then it's wrong, or it's far too authentic and it just doesn't work for my ear. But this is perfect. It's nice, plain, chuck in at some delightful Georgian slang every now and again, which just perks it up beautifully. But it's also not something you have to reach for a dictionary. It's all there in the context.
Yeah.
She makes it all look so easy.
Easy.
I mean, she does. It's beautiful because what you do is you appreciate the language, the setting, the everything, but you just read the murder mystery. And that in itself is great because you get all the way to here and go, ooh, now I didn't work. I did not figure out who done it. Looking back, should have had a good clue here. Didn't really pay attention. And then it goes a bit further towards the end and you think, hang on a minute. And it just keeps twisting and it's like an eel. I can't get a hold of it until right at the end where everything is not laid out, but between Caro and Peregrine, they find all the answers that they have wanted. And it turns into this whole picture. And it's just brilliant. Brilliant. So I'm going to be going out tomorrow and buying Blood and Sugar and reading that as well.
Yeah,
I know.
And you're right. It's a rich tapestry of character as well. I mean, I really liked Carol Corsham, I have to say, who is known for her opinions. I love that expression. I thought, oh, wait a wee minute, that could be me. I found it very, very helpful in such a sort of big encompassing novel to have that thing at the beginning where it just told you the little groups of people, because it's a big cast of characters.
Yeah, it is.
You think, and the one thing that caught me slightly at the beginning, because the physical book hadn't arrived, so I was reading it. I was reading it on, electronically, and sometimes on my phone, if I was somewhere that, I could sit and read it on my phone. And that sort of book just doesn't work that way, because you think, gosh, but who was that person? I need to double check that, because I got a little bit confused with Peregrine Child, because she refers to mostly by his surname.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, that's Child. Who's Peregrine? They got dislocated on my phone, as it were, on the page. And so when the book came through, the physical book came through, that was just much more of a joy, because you could you know, go to the front and you say, oh, I remember now who that person is and who's related to that and the rest of it. And I thought that worked. And of course, I am a big fan of a map.
Yes.
I'm a big fan of a map because they were there and they went over there and, you know, and that. And just what you said, it's a world of the very rich versus the very poor.
Yeah.
They are so far apart. And sadly, it sounds a bit like we're getting back to that stage in the present day. And
something's never changed.
You know, patriarchy rules. And just as you said, the women are either rich and married or they're earning their living on the streets or warehouses. It's such a division in both the sexes and in the money. In fact,
I always feel that historical novels, obviously they've got a lot to say about their own plot and their own time, but a lot of them also have quite a lot to point us in the right direction that, you know, what are we looking for today? And we are looking at, you know, the class divide, the money divide.
And I was struck by that. In fact, I was struck by it in the first two books as well, because you had the kind of the Russian influence in the island and the people and the money that was being made, you know, by, you know, folk that you didn't really know about. There were gangsters in there too.
Yeah.
Which just reflected something very similar in the north of England with Get Carter. And then we're down here where money is ruling it all and, you know, is controlling it all. And so, well, I think that was all very nice. So we're coming to an end, and there's been a few comments up and, oh, great. The last one is, agree, it's a great insight into female networks and power under the surface of Georgian society.
Well put.
Well put indeed. So we have had a few comments as they've come up, and I've sort of fed them in if I was going to speak a little bit myself. So we're drawing to an end. Thank you very much, ladies, and Tommy. Tommy will look at it on Facebook or again on YouTube later on, and I'm sure other people will too. But anyone out there, thanks for being our audience tonight, and I'm going to pass you over now to the one and only Craig Robertson, who will be talking about next month's choices.
Hello, did you have a good evening? I want to cut the end of it, but it sounded a lot of fun.
Yeah,
it was indeed. Thank you.
I had to write a book. I didn't have time to listen to it all. I can listen to it and catch up, obviously. So next month, we have 3 great books for you. First of all, we have, and there you can see them on screen. We'll go from left to right. We have The Cursed Girls, or it might be The Cursed Girls, I'm not entirely sure, by Carol Ramsey. It's the story of Melissa, who goes home to her family estate, and there may be a curse on the house, and if there is she next? Then we have The Quiet People by Paul Cleave, fantastic New Zealand author. His new novel is about 2 married crime writers who think they can carry out the perfect crime. This is a wee bit too close to home for me, but I can live with that. It's okay. Last but not least, we have Mark Billingham and The Rabbit Hole. Alice is a police detective investigating a murder inside a psychiatric unit, and the only problem is that she is also a patient. So please read 1, 2, or all 3 of the books. Come back here in a month's time and we will discuss them alongside, if I can remember, Sharon Bearden, Suze Clark-Morris, and Craig Sisterson. There we go. Remembered.
Great team, great team. So thanks all to my team and Tommy in his absence, but here in video. Okay, see you all next month.
Thanks, Lynn.
Right, thank you very much.
Good night.
Good night.